Welcome. Thank you all for joining us for this month's Dr. G Chat with Mesh. I have a couple housekeeping things to share. We do ask that you just stay on mute during the presentation so we can limit any disruptions. We are, of course, recording this presentation and we will get it linked on YouTube for later review and sharing. And finally, feel free to put your questions in the chat and I will go ahead and grab those and get those answered during our Q&A to Dr. G. And we'll leave a little time at the end too to talk through any questions about Mesh accreditation. So Rachel, on to you.
Excellent. So today we had picked the timely topic about self-esteem and self-advocacy, this being a month focused on building self-esteem. And we wanted to first start out by Dr. G welcoming you back. It's wonderful to have you here and help us working through all of these amazing contexts that we look at the different skills, the different things that we want for our kids and how we build that. So the first real question I have for you is, if we look at self-advocacy and we look at self-esteem, how do you define each of these and how do they relate to each other?
So we're talking about self-advocacy because it's one of the skills that we need to build resilience. So taking it back, resilience is teaching kids how to navigate change and to build the mental, emotional, and social health that we want. We talked a lot about play patterns that build kids' self-advocacy. So what is that? That's the ability to explain what's happening to you and for you, to tell a story about what happened to you that day, to explain why you're having the feelings you're having, to be able to name the feelings you're having, to understand what other feelings other people might be having. Basically, to get the help you need, you have to be able to explain what's going on for you and put it in some kind of context or talk about emotions. And so I think it's pretty easy for adults to see why kids who build the skill of self-advocacy, when they face something really hard later, they'll be stronger. They'll be less likely to engage in risky behaviors if they have confidence that they know how to go to an adult or someone who's in a position to help them and say, this is what happened from my point of view. This is how I'm feeling. This is what I experienced. This is what I saw. This is what I felt. This is what I need. So that's what self-advocacy is. And I think it's pretty clear why that's useful. The other thing that building the skill of self-advocacy teaches kids is that trustworthy adults listen and that they can expect. So like Rachel, when your kids were little and they would come to you and they would have a long, sometimes incomprehensible story to tell you about a TV show they watched or a character they thought of in their head or a game that they're playing, and you did what you're doing now. You went, huh? Yep. Okay. Interesting. Tell me more about that. What you were teaching them was not that you too loved their spin-off of Pokemon. You were teaching them that they were worth listening to and that they could trust you to listen. And even when you said, this is a really interesting story, and do you see that I am on the phone and I cannot listen right now? So I hope you will remember and tell me later, even though you didn't hope they would remember, you hoped they would forget. You said that you were teaching them that when they need someone, if that person is trustworthy, that person will hear them. Maybe not agree with them, maybe not have all the time in the world for them, but that accepting, receiving communication from that kiddo was important to you. And that builds not only their willingness to go to an adult, but their ability to discern who's a trustworthy adult and who is not. And that's really helpful. And when kids are listened to by people that they admire, that builds their self-esteem. Self-esteem is our sense that we deserve attention and resources. And that belief that we deserve attention and resources builds our sense of our own value. Self-esteem is knowing that I have value. If I hold you in esteem, Rachel, and I do, it's because I see the incredible value that you bring to my life, to the world, all those things. We all esteem toys and games because we esteem play and we esteem children. We see the value that they bring and we want to serve that value. So when anyone has self-esteem, it's that they recognize their own inherent worth. They recognize their own inherent value. There are a lot of experiences, even with the greatest home life, kids can get hit after hit to their self-esteem. It's one of the reasons we worry so much about social media in kids' lives, because they can get hit after hit to their own sense of their own worth and value. And so self-esteem is recognizing like, it's not more than others. It's just, I have value. So I think when you think about it that way, it's pretty easy to see how when you tell a story to an adult and they try to grasp what you're saying, that builds your sense of your own value and worth.
So let me ask you a question going down this path of self-esteem for a minute, because it's one of the things for me. I had two girls and I had two girls and a boy, right? And absolutely with social media and all those pieces, I was really concerned and trying to make sure that they find the value in themselves. And even when they were younger, trying to make them feel that they were worthwhile and that they were strong and that they were smart and they were powerful. How do you do that? I mean, you hit a point. I always say to my kids, it's like when mom tells you you're pretty, and every kid's like, whatever, like my mom has to say that. My kids were actually like, well, you have to say that, you're my mom, right?
Yeah.
So like, how do you build self-esteem in your kids when, as a parent, it's heard through a different lens, or it's heard, what do you do to be able to actually build that self-worth?
So I'm going to give you one hack, and that is our brains open differently to what's said about us than what's said to us, no matter who it is, actually.
Okay.
So like, let's say Erin and I were in a meeting and I said to her, Erin, I really appreciate your professionalism and your energy and your creativity. Maybe she takes that in. Maybe she's like, okay, that feels good. But a part of her brain also is trying to assign reasoning to it. I wonder if Rachel said something to Debbie about wanting to make sure I felt valued, or I wonder if actually she thought I didn't do a great job at something and she was trying to boost me up in another way, right? Our brains look for the reasoning behind it. But if you and I were on Zoom, Rachel, and Erin, well, Zoom's a bad example because everybody knows when people are coming in. But if you and I were standing in a coffee shop talking, and I was telling you what a great job I thought Erin was doing, and she walked in behind me and I didn't see her, her brain will hear that as more likely true than if I said it to her.
Oh,
And kids are the same. So if you tell your kid, hey, I really appreciate the effort you put in on science project. Like, I know it's tomorrow and we don't know how you're going to do, but I've seen how you've done and I've been really impressed with all the effort that you put in. They may take that in. Even if they say to you, well, you have to say that you're my mom, they may take that in. It may make them feel good. But if they heard you on the phone telling your best friend or your family member or someone else entirely on a work call, being like, I just have to tell you, I am not disgusted with kids today because my kid has been working their tail off on their science fair project and I am super impressed with them. Their brains hear it differently. So I often encourage adults to gossip about kids. And you can do this when you see kids in public that you don't know, right? Use gossip for good is the way I usually put it. But I love the idea of spreading the message even to like your employees in your toy store, or when you yourself are in a grocery store, because you people all like kids. So I know you're in a grocery store and you're behind a family who's got a 3-year-old sitting facing you in the cart while the adult is doing all the grocery things at, putting things on the checkout and paying for it and whatever. And you're flirting with that 3-year-old, like not in a creepy way, but you're like, hey, you're smiling at that 3-year-old and you're maybe like peek-wooing with the 3-year-old. And a lot of people at that moment will use praise to connect with that kiddo. And praise, and this is a really important idea of how praise and self-esteem actually work together. So praise doesn't always build self-esteem. If you praise that child's light up shoes or curly hair or whatever it is, that builds connection. Praise, authentic praise almost always builds connection. But if you want to build self-esteem in that kiddo in that moment, you have to praise something they can control. Wow, I can tell you're really curious, boy, you're looking around at everything. Or, gosh, you are super helpful being patient while your grown-up deals with your groceries. Way to go. When you praise something that someone, and this is true of adults too, by the way, when you praise something someone can control, you build their own sense of value. You build their self-esteem. When you praise something they have no control over, like their light up shoes that someone else bought them, or the fact that their team won, for example, then you're praising an accomplishment. And not only does it not build that much self-esteem, it sometimes builds imposter syndrome. So praise and self-esteem, there's a lot of research So when you praise the effort your kid put in on science fair, you're praising something they can control. You have a shot at building their self-esteem and their confidence and getting more of that, because getting praise from your grown-ups feels good, even if you don't say so. But if you praise you got the blue ribbon in the science fair, they know they could enter 3 more science fairs. They might not get a blue ribbon because it depends who else enters the science fair. So one of the things that we know from research is that one of the best things we can do when we're trying to build self-esteem in someone else is, and this is the one I love because you can always do it, listen. Like, just listen and believe that they believe what they're telling you, right? So, and listen, our kids lie at times, and it's okay to wonder if they're lying and even try and suss that out. But in general, if a kid's telling you a story about a show they like or an experience they had or whatever, just listening to them and being like, wow, okay, I'm interested. Just being interested builds self-esteem. And the other reliable way to build self-esteem in kids is, in anyone, is to praise something that they can control.
I gotta say, as you're talking about this and the relationship to imposter syndrome, to me, I'm like, oh my gosh, this happens in adults constantly. If you think about times that you've been praised for something that was an accomplishment, or something that an award that was won, or something, or for me, a specific product being really successful, A, there's a lot of people who are involved in that, and B, it's like there's a bit of luck that falls into this. So you're like, I have
More than a little.
this, right? Like, I don't know what like it'd be, dude. That's really interesting. That's really interesting.
One of the ways I think about it is this. If you were a part of any kind of team when you were a student yourself, if you're on an athletic team or a debate team or a choir or in a show or anything, right? And somebody in your family, like say a friend of one of your parents, came to see it, and they came up to you afterwards and they said, wow, you crushed it. You won, right? Like say it's a sports thing. It's like, I was so impressed. You guys won that. You killed them. When's your next game? Then you're trying to figure out when's the next game that I really think we're going to win. But if I say, I was so impressed with the way you communicated with each other and the effort you had and the sportsmanship and how respectful you were of the refs, when's your next game? You can just say Tuesday, because you know that you can control those things. But ask any kid, they can't control the grade they get or if they win, because it depends on other people's performance. And your kid could be on the most amazing 5th grade basketball team, but if they play the 12th graders, they're gonna lose. Like, so, and kids know that if a team shows up that's better than us, or some kid comes into the class who's better at science than me, or somebody shows up with a better singing voice, then not only do I not know if I can give you the thing you said you wanted and that you valued the most, which was me winning, but also if you love me because I won the talent show, you may not know that there are people my age who are better singers than me, but I know there probably are. And then I think that your love and praise is conditional upon my achievement and not my effort. And that's how imposter syndrome gets built, my friends.
Okay, let's jump really quickly over to self-advocacy. So this is something that when we first started this whole process was, I understood it, or I assumed things about it that were different. So to me, self-advocacy, I thought was more like being able to say like, no, I want this, and not backing down. And I was a little bit afraid of that because honestly, with kids, they say, I want this a lot of times, and a lot of
And
times,
we say no
right,
a lot,
exactly.
and they don't win.
No,
right.
That's
if we're doing a good job, they lose. Yeah.
So the idea of self-advocacy being something where you are able to communicate your needs without maybe that exact, like, I want this, but how do you communicate your needs or your experiences or pieces like that? This was a piece that for me, as we were digging into this research and working together, and we were talking about storytelling, and I really thought storytelling was about forming a cohesive story, right? Like what we learn in school in 2nd grade, you do the things, or like we have a beginning,
a topic sentence, and you
end. Yeah, exactly. And like that creates a story that you can actually follow, because we've all had the experiences of kids where they're telling a story and
cannot follow
at all, right? So this was a big moment for me of understanding sort of what self-advocacy is.
Well, and another piece of self-advocacy that's really important is honesty.
Interesting.
So a lot of the time we think about, well, our kids are really learning storytelling when they are making up stories about, Ms. Fork and Ms. Knife and how and that's great for their creativity and their imagination. And those things have incredible power, but they don't add to this skill for mental, emotional, and social health. So this skill is about being able to explain what happened to you. And actually, Rachel, I think you can understand how a kindergartner who gets to kindergarten and has an expectation that when they say, I want the cookie first now, that's successful self-advocacy only if it works. And that works on 0 kindergarten teachers, by the way. That get like whatever happens at home, 0 kindergarten teachers are like, oh, well, you were the loudest and most annoying, so you get the first cookie. No, they're not that dumb. They're not setting up that expectation, right? They're like, well, Priya is sitting quietly and waiting for her cookie. She's going to get the first cookie. And all the other kids are like, right? Sitting quietly as loudly as they can so that they can get the next cookie. So self-advocacy is about teaching our kids the skills to explain what happened to them in a way that a person can hear and help them, like wants to help them. So a lot of the skills that we talk to parents about when they're trying to teach self-advocacy is talking to kids about how to interrupt politely. And if you live in the South, you better know how to sir and ma'am people, or if you're in the military, if your family's in the military, you need to know how and when to interrupt someone and when not to interrupt someone and how to make eye contact. I talk to my kids about grown-up secret code, which is the difference between how adults want to help them when they say, excuse me, sir, I was wondering if you could let me in the exit door because I'm hoping to meet my family, as opposed to, why I can't go in there? I gotta, right? So I teach my kids that using contractions like gotta instead of need to, or nah instead of no thanks, that it triggers something different in adult brains and we just hear them differently. And so knowing how to say, yes, sir, I'm sorry, got my kid out of a world of hurt when the other 2 idiot 4th graders who TP'd the principal's car that were with him said, I don't know. Right? So that causing the principal to call me afterwards and be like, so they're in trouble, but I actually have more respect for your son after this happened than I did before, but tell him that and I'll say you're a liar, right? So understanding self-advocacy is not actually about intransigent demanding what you need. It is about knowing how to explain what happened to you and understanding how people work so that you can see in this situation, I need to just go to the bathroom before I wet my pants. That's me advocating for myself. You've said I can't, but I am not going to be the kid in 3rd grade who wets their pants. I'm going to get up and go and take the consequences later. Knowing how to say, I am allergic to that. I'm not going to eat that. Like knowing how to say that is not okay, totally not acceptable. Right. And knowing how to say, this is how I feel about it. I get that I'm not going to get my way, but this is what I experienced. This is how I feel about it.
Okay. Well, listen, guys, we only have about, 5 or so minutes left. I wanted to kind of open it up to anybody else who has any questions as we look at self-advocacy and self-esteem. I don't know if there's questions in the chat. I know Erin was monitoring.
Nope, no questions in the chat. I was just going to ask a question back to the self-esteem piece. Obviously, kids are developing, and as they're interacting and engaging with friends and peers and adults, they're learning these skills, right? They're growing their self-esteem.
Even if we don't name them, they're, you've
right.
learned them and we didn't name them when we were growing up, right?
Yeah, well, definitely, for sure. I mean, feelings, what are those, right?
Stuff those down.
But thinking about as children play, to me, I think the first thing that comes to mind for self-esteem in particular is playing with an adult and a child, right? Like those 2 worlds coming together for play. But are there other opportunities that sort of just naturally happen that are building skills with gameplay or toys? I can imagine also, of course, sports and dance and that kind of stuff, but like physical toy play, is there anything there?
Anytime you have collaborative play and you're like, oh, that was a good idea, I want to do that with you. When kids are at a playground and one of them has made up a game and another kid's like, can I join? And they say yes, both kids gain self-esteem from that. Mm-hmm. One of the places that kids learn a ton of self-advocacy is with their siblings. They're usually willing to advocate for themselves and say that's, or explaining the story to an adult. That's not what I saw, or that's not what happened, or no, I felt this, or no, I believe that. With two of my kids, I am completely convinced that one was born to sharpen the other, and that one was born to soften the other one. Like that they each needed that experience of learning how to give a little for someone and learning how to say, I'm not going to always do it your way. And kids, because their siblings are still going to be there the next day for sure, they will often try things out, say more of their truth. Even if they haven't found a way to say it kindly, they will often speak their truth more often with siblings. So one of the things we can do as adults is to watch that and notice out loud when somebody listens, even though they didn't want to, or when somebody shut you down and they shouldn't have, that wasn't respectful. Not with an eye of like, oh, I'm going to punish you for interacting, but just noticing, boy, I wouldn't want to be friends with somebody who treated me that way. How could we do that better?
Very interesting. Okay, does anybody have any other questions for Dr. G or about self-advocacy, self-esteem?
Erin, what are we talking about next month?
Next month, you actually kind of brought it up already, is going to be about luck. So thinking of the month of March with St. Patrick's Day, that's going to be how you can actually build your luck, right? It's not just because you're lucky.
And we'll talk to you about kids who get into a narrative where they're unlucky and they feel like things aren't going their way and just kind of the world feels ranged against them, and what helps to help them with that.
That'll be huge. I know for my kids, absolutely. We have those times where they're just like, everything's going wrong and nothing's ever gonna go right. And trying to talk them out of it again comes back to, Mom, you have to say that because you're my mom. Right. You really understand, so that'll be really interesting.
I'm currently having a week like that. So unfortunately, we don't get out of it with childhood. Bye, everybody. Thank you so much for your time.
Hey, just a quick question.
Yeah.
The research that has come out about mental health, children, all that, just from a baseline perspective, how often does that change? In other words, as we go forward, we're going to be using subsets of data from the past, correct? Simply because it's from the past.
Meaning, how often is there new research?
Yeah, that we will incorporate that, we'll look forward, an update, or is it?
Yeah, there's a couple of big studies, like tens of thousands of kids and teens that happen every 2 years for like the last 20 years. Like the CDC does something called the National Youth Risk Behavior Survey, and it goes in depth in mental health, some other things too that are very interesting, but in depth in mental health. And that it came out in 2023. It'll come out again in 2025, like that.
So we'll be pretty much using the most current information based on where we are, not.
That is my job. Yes,
okay,
to bring you guys whatever's most current.
Perfect. Thank you.
You bet.
Excellent. All right, thanks, Dr. G. I know you got to go. If anybody has any other questions, I know we just announced the accreditation program in the last couple of weeks. If anyone has any questions about meshhelps.org or the accreditation program, Erin and I are here to answer any of those, just since we've got people together. If anyone's got that on their mind. Awesome. All right. Well, thank you guys so much for coming. We're doing another one of these next month, and if we find that people like them, we'll see if we can continue. These monthlies are meant to be not sort of the deep dive into mesh, but more about the topics that are resonating around within the world, around the same concepts that we're talking about with mesh and sort of how it applies to everyday life. So open to everyone.
Yep. March 19th is the next one. So mark your calendar. It's at noon Central, 1 o'clock Eastern. So we hope to see you guys all there.
Excellent.
Thanks
so much, you guys.